Hi, I'm the twin they don't talk about. At our high school reunion, my brother raised a toast to his own success, then had his girlfriend dump grape wine down my pants, right in front of everyone. Laughed like it was some frat prank. They called me a failure, told me to smile through it. But what they didn't see coming was how the man who mocked me in front of 50 people would soon be the one begging, literally on his knees, for mercy. You ever wonder what happens when the quiet ones stop staying quiet? I arrived earlier than I needed to. That was intentional. I wanted to walk into the room before it filled with noise, before old voices reclaim their corners. The hotel ballroom sat just off the river, glass panels catching the last light of evening. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and catered coffee. White tablecloths lay perfectly flat, name tags arranged in neat rows near the entrance, as if order alone could keep the past from slipping back in. I checked in without ceremony. My badge waited for me, printed clean and simple. Caldwell Morrow. No titles, no explanations. I slid it onto my jacket and moved farther into the room, choosing a seat near the edge, close enough to observe, but not close enough to invite conversation. Soft music played through speakers overhead. People trickled in, pairs and clusters, laughter arriving before they did. Faces had changed. Hairlines receded. Smiles had learned restraint. Yet the way they moved felt familiar, like habits never fully unlearned. I watched classmates greet one another with practiced warmth, their voices carrying the confidence of lives already settled. I told myself I hadn't come for redemption. I hadn't come to confront anyone or rewrite anything. I came to prove I could stand here without folding inward. That was the quiet test I'd set for myself, nothing more. A few people nodded at me in passing. Some smiled, searching my face for context. Others didn't recognize me at all. That was fine. I answered questions politely, kept my tone light, let conversations end naturally. Being overlooked was something I understood well. I knew how to let it pass without leaving a mark. Then the room shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No announcement. Just a subtle change in energy, like a draft through an open door. People straightened, heads turned, laughter sharpened. Grayson had arrived. My twin brother moved through the entrance as if he'd been expected. Dark suit, confident stride, his presence filling space the way it always had. Hands reached out to greet him. Someone clapped him on the back. He smiled easily, the kind of smile that suggested nothing had ever slowed him down. I stayed where I was. From across the room, I watched him accept the attention as if it belonged to him by default. That had always been our pattern. He expanded. I adjusted. He spotted me near the tables and paused. For a brief second, our eyes met. Something flickered across his face, recognition mixed with amusement. Then he walked over. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, loud enough to draw a few glances. His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. I nodded. "It's been a while." He looked down at my plate, then back up at me, smiling wider. "Still a failure, huh? Eat up." A ripple of laughter moved through the table. Not everyone joined in. Some people looked at their glasses. Others pretended to study the decorations. No one spoke. I kept my hands steady. I didn't answer him. I focused on the pattern in the tablecloth, on the faint hum of the air conditioning. Responding would turn me into the disruption. Silence in that moment was the only way to stay intact. Grayson lingered a second longer, waiting for a reaction that never came. Then he shrugged and moved on, already distracted by someone else eager for his attention. I sat there, aware of every muscle in my body, of how carefully I was holding myself together. The urge to speak rose and passed. I knew the cost of breaking the quiet. If I said anything, I'd be the one people remembered for the wrong reason. If I stayed still, I'd remain unseen. For now, I chose unseen. I told myself this was the worst it would get that night. Something told me I was wrong. The music kept playing, soft and forgettable, as if it were trying to cover up the silence that followed Grayson's jab. My fork hovered over my plate, untouched. I could still feel the weight of his words settling across my shoulders like dust. Around me, conversation picked back up. Low hums, clinking glasses, half-hearted laughter. But it all sounded like it came from another room. I stayed in my seat. I told myself to chew, swallow, pretend the night was still salvageable, that maybe it wasn't as bad as it felt. I brought the fork to my mouth and bit into a piece of cold chicken that tasted like cardboard. Then I saw her, Lena. She was leaning against the bar just a few steps away, a glass of red wine in her hand. Her dress clung too tightly to be accidental, and the way she tilted her head when someone spoke to her, like she was letting them into a secret, was familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten. I hadn't spoken to her yet tonight. She hadn't needed to say anything. Her presence said enough. She belonged in Grayson's world, and I didn't. She caught my eye, smiled. Not the soft kind, not even friendly. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they're about to enjoy something at your expense. I looked away, pretending to be busy with my napkin. She didn't let that stop her. A few minutes later, she walked over, slow and confident, weaving around the tables like she owned the room. She stopped just behind my chair. I could smell the wine before I saw it. Sweet, dark, bold. "You always look so stiff," she said, her voice sugar-coated but loud enough for people to hear. "You should loosen up a little, Cal." I didn't turn around. I didn't respond. And then she did it. She leaned forward, one hand on my shoulder like we were old friends sharing a laugh, and tipped the glass. It wasn't a full pour, just enough. Enough to soak through the front of my pants. Enough to look, to anyone standing nearby, like something else entirely had happened. The wine was cold. That's the first thing I registered. Cold, and then wet. And then silence. A beat of confusion, followed by the first snicker, and then more. "That's... wow," someone said behind me. "Did he just... it looks like he pissed himself." That one landed. The laughter picked up speed, cruel and contagious. It wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. It sliced cleaner in a room where no one was willing to speak up. I stayed seated, my hands clenched under the table. I didn't stand. I didn't wipe at the stain. I didn't look for napkins or excuses. I just froze. If I moved, I'd confirm the joke. If I reacted, I'd feed it. I could hear Lena laughing with someone by the bar, already telling the story as if it were a harmless prank. Grayson hadn't even bothered to pretend to stop her. He just sat back and watched. I stared down at the tablecloth. The stain spread slowly, bleeding into the fabric. I could feel my face burning. Not from shame, not entirely. From something older. A memory that didn't have words, only weight. All those years, I'd thought if I kept my head down, stayed out of the way, they'd forget to come for me again. I was wrong. I sat through it all. Lena moved on. The group returned to their conversations. It didn't take long. These things rarely lasted more than a few minutes. A laugh, a look, a comment, and then it was gone. Forgotten by everyone except the person still wearing it. But something shifted, not in them, in me. I looked down at my lap. The wine stain had already begun to dry. It wouldn't disappear. Not tonight. Maybe not even tomorrow. That's when it hit me. They still saw me the way they always had. The quiet one. The easy target. The one who'd take the hit and smile politely through it. They didn't know what I'd carried, what I'd buried, what I'd given up just to keep the peace. And I realized then, peace wasn't what they wanted. They wanted silence. They wanted my silence. I reached for my water, took a sip, and set it down. My hand was steady now. The room thought the moment had passed. They thought the joke had landed and faded, just another awkward bump in the night's entertainment. But they were wrong. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was counting. Not just the seconds since the spill. Not just the people who had laughed. I was counting the moments I'd let slip by. The times I'd swallowed my voice. The years I'd stood in corners while Grayson played king of every room. And I knew something was coming. Because the past doesn't stay buried when you finally stop protecting it. I didn't wait for the laughter to end. I stood up slowly, careful not to make noise, careful not to draw more eyes. I didn't look at anyone. Not Grayson, not Lena, not the old classmates pretending they didn't hear what they heard or see what they saw. I walked away like I had somewhere to be, even if the only place I needed was somewhere else. The ballroom doors opened easily. The cool air outside hit me in the face, sharp and honest. Nothing like the warmed-over comfort inside. I stepped onto the balcony overlooking the river. It was quiet out there. Just the slow sound of water and the faint rhythm of the band bleeding through the closed doors behind me. I wasn't leaving the event. That mattered. I leaned against the railing, the metal cold through my sleeve. The chill grounded me in a way nothing else had all night. I exhaled, long and slow, watching my breath dissolve into the darkness. Inside, they were probably pouring another round of drinks, starting up a group photo, maybe even retelling the wine incident as if it were a funny story that didn't matter. It always went like that. The group would absorb the damage and move on, as long as the one being hurt didn't interrupt the fun. I looked down at the stain on my pants. Purple had spread across the fabric in uneven waves. I didn't touch it, didn't try to hide it. Just stood there, staring, like maybe if I looked at it long enough, it would mean less. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, thumbed it awake. A few messages had come in, all from people inside. "Hey man, that was rough. Hope you're okay. Lena's had too much to drink. Don't take it personally. You know how these things get. High school energy, right? High school energy." That's what they were calling it. That's how they stayed clean. Turn everything into a joke, wrap it in nostalgia, and no one has to own what they did. They weren't checking in on me. They were checking a box. I locked the screen and shoved the phone back in my pocket. The reflection in the glass door caught my eye. It was just me standing there, but not the version of myself I had expected to see. My face was calm. Still, not angry, not shaken. The stain was still there, but I didn't feel small anymore. It wasn't just tonight. It hadn't started with Lena or the wine. It was years of moments like this. Quiet humiliations wrapped in laughter, slaps disguised as jokes. Grayson had learned early that the loudest version of the story gets remembered. I had spent most of my life helping him write his version by keeping quiet about mine. That silence, It didn't protect me. It protected him. And that's what hit hardest. Not the cold wine, not the laughter, the fact that I'd helped shape the story that erased me. I could leave now, walk out through the parking lot, disappear into the night, and no one would stop me. They'd say I just needed some air or that I'd left early, same as always. But I didn't come here to disappear. I turned and pushed open the door, letting the music wrap back around me. I wasn't angry anymore. That emotion had come and gone like a passing storm. What I felt now was different, quieter, sharper, resolve. I headed toward the restroom, passing a few familiar faces who didn't know what to say. They offered soft nods or avoided eye contact altogether. I didn't stop for any of them. Inside the men's room, I ran cold water over a paper towel and dabbed at the worst of the stain. It didn't help much. The wine had already set in, like it belonged there. I looked in the mirror. My jacket was still clean. I pulled it tight across my body and buttoned it, not to hide the stain, just to keep it visible enough without being obvious. Let them see it. Let them wonder. Let them squirm. I wasn't here to smooth anything over anymore. I dried my hands, straightened my collar, and gave myself one last look, and then I walked back toward the noise. When I stepped back into the ballroom, I wasn't angry anymore. That's when I became dangerous. Not loud, not reckless, just resolved. I moved through the ballroom like a man with a purpose, not a vendetta. The music played the same tired jazz number it had cycled through twice already, but the energy had shifted. Or maybe it was just me who'd changed. As I passed the buffet, a few heads turned, not dramatically, just those casual glances people steal when they think you're not looking. I could feel them taking in the dark stain on my pants, half hidden by my jacket, but no one laughed. That part was over. I didn't search for Grayson, but I knew exactly where he'd be. Front table, near the stage, the spotlight brushing his shoulder like it knew who the room belonged to. Lena was back in her seat, legs crossed, whispering something into another woman's ear. They both laughed. Not a cruel laugh this time. Just the kind people use when they know they still hold the floor. Grayson didn't look up at first, but he felt me. The way he stiffened, chin lifting slightly, told me everything. He turned. Our eyes met. And just like that, he stood and started toward me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just placed a hand on my elbow and said, "Come with me." We moved through the narrow hallway between the ballroom and the coat check. The carpet muffled our footsteps. The air smelled faintly of cologne and dust. Grayson leaned against the wall, arms crossed, face carefully neutral. "What are you doing, Cal?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence do its job. He continued, voice just above a whisper, "You're making things uncomfortable. People are trying to have a good time." "You mean your people?" I said, flat, calm. He didn't blink. "This is a reunion, not a courtroom. Don't turn it into something it isn't. Then don't pretend it's something it's not." That earned me a flash of irritation. He straightened his posture, pulled his shoulders back like he was prepping for a press conference. "Look, I get it. You're upset. I told Lena she crossed a line." "You told her?" I raised an eyebrow. "Or you reminded her to smile while doing it again next year?" He looked past me toward the ballroom doors. "You're reading too much into this." "I'm not reading anything. I'm remembering." His voice dropped low, tight. "You want to dredge up the past? Fine. But don't forget, I know things too. About you. About your choices. And the version of you these people think they remember? That's fragile. It wouldn't take much to break it, I finished for him. Is that the threat? That you'll ruin what little reputation I still have left? I'm just saying, he said, smoothing his tie like he was back in a boardroom. You're not the only one with a story. I stared at him a long moment, not angry, just awake. I'm not here to embarrass anyone, Grayson, but I'm not covering for you anymore either. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You're always so righteous, always the victim. No, not anymore. He scoffed and turned his back. Careful, Cal, you don't have the footing you think you do. But I didn't move, and I didn't call after him. I let him walk away. Back in the ballroom, nothing had changed on the surface. People still chatted over shrimp cocktail and reminisced about yearbook quotes. But something had shifted between us. I knew it. And he knew it. He'd drawn lines before. Quiet ones, invisible unless you were the one being boxed in. But this was the first time I'd drawn one of my own. Aloud. In front of him. No anger. No scene. Just truth. As he melted back into the crowd, his arm slipped behind Lena's chair like nothing had happened. But his eyes cut back to me once. Cold. Calculating. He wasn't finished. I knew it then. Right then. He wasn't going to forget this hallway. He wasn't going to forgive the silence I broke. And that was the moment he decided I was a problem. Grayson didn't make a scene, didn't raise a hand or voice, but I saw it. In the stillness of his eyes, the calculation had changed. I'd crossed some invisible line, and now he was working on his next move. It didn't take long. The hotel lights dimmed just slightly, the way they do when someone's about to take the stage. The MC, a former class president with a voice too eager for the mic, tapped twice on the glass and called the room to attention. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special moment here tonight. Someone who's offered to say a few words. I didn't have to guess. Grayson stood, smile effortless, claps greeting him before he'd even opened his mouth. He made his way to the front, his steps unhurried, as though none of this had been planned, and yet, somehow, perfectly timed. He adjusted the mic like a man who knew its height before touching it. Wow, he said with a sheepish grin. 25 years, and I still hate public speaking. Polite laughter. I stayed seated. I knew what was coming. I just didn't know how far he'd take it. Grayson launched into a speech about memories, about the people in this room who had shaped him, teachers, classmates, even rivals. Then, smoothly, he pivoted. We all took different paths, he said, but some of us had to start from rock bottom. He paused just long enough. You remember senior year? He continued. I barely graduated, barely held it together. My folks were divorcing. I was lost. But I had to pull myself up. I worked nights, paid for school myself, started the business in a garage. No investors, just sweat and willpower. The room was quiet. Hooked. I sat back, staring not at him, but at the projector screen flickering to life behind him. Photos of his company, snapshots from newspapers, a plaque with his name on it. All real, all technically true. But here was the thing. That garage was mine. That first prototype, the one that landed the funding, my code, my design, my weekends, my sleepless nights. His name was on the LLC because he said I needed time to stabilize, because my breakdown at 23 had scared him, because I'd been foolish enough to agree. Now that whole narrative, our story, was being retold with me erased like a smudge on glass. The audience clapped. People leaned into each other, whispering, nodding. "You earned it," someone said aloud. A voice I recognized, our old chemistry teacher, Mr. Farley. He'd once called me the quiet one with the brightest spark. Grayson smiled graciously, as if embarrassed by the praise. I felt myself drift, just slightly, like the air in the room was thicker than it had been minutes ago. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was off balance. How do you fight a story once it's made people feel something? Because that's what this was now. A feeling. He'd turned truth into performance, and they'd bought it. Grayson wrapped up with something modest. "I'm just grateful to be here," he said. "I hope I've made you all proud." Applause again. I didn't clap. I didn't even move. He stepped down. People rose to greet him, some offering handshakes, others snapping photos like he was the keynote at a conference. I stood, finally, not to challenge him, not yet, but to leave. I made my way toward the exit, slow, steady, not looking back. Halfway there, I stopped. There was a quiet voice in my head, not one of shame this time, but of calculation. Maybe this is what peace costs, I thought, walking away, letting go, letting him win. I reached the door, hand on the handle, paused. That room behind me, full of laughter and false stories. It wasn't just his victory. It was my silence. And for the first time that night, I wondered if silence had finally beaten me. I let the ballroom door swing shut behind me. The music faded instantly, just a dull echo now. No more clinking glasses, no forced laughter, just the hum of overhead lights in the hallway and the faint scent of overwaxed floors. I didn't storm out. I didn't draw attention. That would have given him too much satisfaction. I just walked until I couldn't hear them anymore. To my left, past the restrooms and the framed photos of past banquet halls, a smaller conference room sat open and unused. A sign on the door still read, "Vendor Overflow." I stepped in without thinking. The room was cool, too brightly lit. White walls, a single long table, chairs stacked in the corner. Empty space, but right then, it felt like a sanctuary. I sank into one of the plastic chairs, hands resting on my thighs, and let the silence wrap around me. Only then did I notice the trembling. My hands, steady for hours despite every word, every look, every drop of that wine, were finally shaking. Not from fear, from holding it all together for too long. I rubbed my palms against my pants, which were still stained, still damp in patches. The wine had dried dark across the fabric, but the reminder remained, visible, literal. And somehow, it hurt less than the applause, the speech, the standing ovation. It looped through my head in pieces, like a bad broadcast with the volume turned up just enough to sting. Some of us had to start from rock bottom. I built this on my own. Not a word about how that garage business came to be. Not a whisper about who soldered that first circuit board or who spent nights coding when Grayson was out networking. That was the lie. Not in what he said, but in what he left out. And the worst part, no one cared. Maybe they never had. I pulled out my phone. There was a message from Lena. "You okay?" And another from an unknown number with a blurry photo of Grayson on stage, captioned, "Legend." I didn't respond to either. Instead, I opened my notes app. I started typing, "Hey, thanks for the invite. I had to head out early. Something came up. Great seeing everyone." My thumb hovered over the screen. All it would take was one tap. No confrontation, no risk. Just a polite bow out. Leave the night behind like everyone would in the morning, with full bellies and half-true memories. For a second, I believed it might be the right move. Grayson had already rewritten the narrative. Maybe it was time to let it stand. Maybe I'd been wrong all these years, carrying this weight like it meant something. Maybe I really was forgettable. Then I saw it, my reflection in the glass wall beside the conference room door. Not the one from college yearbooks or framed senior portraits. Not the guy from those shared photos still floating around Facebook. No, this one had lines around the eyes. A little gray creeping in near the ears. Shoulders slightly slumped from years at a desk. A little older. A little heavier. Still here. Still standing. And for all the nights I'd stayed quiet, all the reunions I skipped, all the credit I surrendered because it wasn't worth the trouble, this would be the one that finally broke me? No. Silence used to feel like dignity, restraint, but now it felt like surrender. And if I walked away tonight, that would be the legacy I'd leave behind. Not the business, not the ideas, not the actual work, but the image of the man who didn't speak up. I put the phone down on the table, didn't send the message, didn't delete it either. I didn't plan a big speech. I didn't rehearse some dramatic reveal. I had no interest in giving them a movie moment, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I couldn't let the lie stand without resistance. Not again. I pushed my chair back and stood up, smoothed out my jacket. It didn't help much. The stain still showed, but now I didn't care. Let them see it. Let them wonder. As I stepped out of the conference room, the hallway was still empty. The ballroom lights bled under the door, gold and flickering. The laughter had settled now, probably into casual conversations, maybe people picking up coats, saying their goodbyes. I paused just before the door. I wasn't going back in to explode. I wasn't angry enough to raise my voice, and I didn't need to be, but I was clear enough to act. I didn't know how I would stop him yet, but I knew I would. I re-entered the ballroom with the kind of stillness you earn, not borrow. The lights had dimmed just slightly, enough to soften the edges of the room, but not the tension in it. People had migrated toward the dessert tables. Idle conversations clung loosely to the corners, but something in the air had shifted. This time, I didn't have to guess if they noticed me. They did. Conversations dipped the moment I passed. Laughter quieted, not into silence, but into the kind of hush you feel more than hear, like the collective breath of people waiting to see if something's about to go wrong. I didn't make eye contact with anyone right away. I didn't need to. I was watching the watchers. Grayson was back at the head table, standing near the bar with a glass of something amber in his hand. He wasn't looking at me, and that told me everything. He knew. He knew I hadn't left the building, that I hadn't backed down, and worse, he knew I was thinking, planning. His shoulder tensed the second I crossed into his peripheral vision. His smile didn't reach his eyes anymore. I was halfway across the room when Leslie Parson intercepted me. High school debate team, now an HR director if I remembered right. She smiled tightly, the kind of smile people wear when they think they're about to deliver bad news gently. "Hey," she said, voice low. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded once, slowly. She leaned in, glancing over her shoulder first. "Someone just told me there was some history between you and Grayson, from back in the early days, about that first startup." Her tone wasn't accusatory, but it wasn't innocent either. I gave nothing away. History's a long word. She hesitated. "I mean, just There's been talk. Something about bad paperwork, mismanaged money. I don't know. It sounds messy. I just figured you'd want to know people are hearing things. And there it was. He moved first. While I was in that empty room gathering the strength to stay, he'd been out here rewriting another version. One where I wasn't just wronged, but unstable. One where I was resentful, unreliable, a footnote to his story at best, a liability at worst. I offered Leslie a faint smile. Appreciate the heads up. She didn't ask more, didn't press. That was the genius of it. No one had to confront me outright. The whispers did the work. They drifted through the air in short, cruel phrases. Wasn't he the one who cracked back in '08? I heard he almost tanked their first investor meeting. I mean, that's why he faded out, right? Not one of them spoke directly to me, but their glances were heavier than any words. By the coffee station, I saw a woman I hadn't spoken to in 20 years pull her husband closer when I passed. A man from my old lab group nodded at me stiffly, then turned away before I could even return it. None of it was loud, none of it violent. But that's how Grayson worked, not with punches, with doubt. And for a second, just one flicker, I almost marched to the stage. I could see it in my head clearly, grabbing the mic, dragging the lie into the light, laying out timelines, documents, facts, naming every omission and every truth he twisted into triumph. But no, that was what he wanted now, for me to react too soon, to look desperate, defensive. Because if I exploded, he won. If I confirmed the image he'd painted, that I was bitter, reckless, consumed with ancient scorekeeping, he wouldn't have to silence me. I'd do it for him. So I didn't go to the mic. I didn't chase him down or shout across the room. Instead, I moved toward the back, past the tables and the leftover slices of cheesecake, past the coat racks and check-in table, until I stood just beyond the glow of the ballroom, near the registration desk. From there, I could still see everything, and I waited. The anxiety was still there, simmering under my ribs, but now it had shape. It had purpose. This wasn't about pride anymore. It was about truth, and I was no longer afraid of what it cost. I leaned against the wall, watching him from a distance. He was laughing again, louder now, too loud. That was another tell. He'd sensed the shift too. He thought he had cornered me. But corners only matter if you're afraid to push back. And I wasn't afraid anymore. Not 5 minutes later, the MC, bless his oblivious heart, stepped up to the mic and tapped it twice. Folks, before we wrap up tonight, we've got time for one last open mic moment. If anyone's got a memory, a thank you, or just a funny story from back in the day, come on up. It was framed as lighthearted, innocent, a final nostalgia reel before everyone shuffled back to hotel rooms and rental cars. But Grayson? I saw him lean back in his chair, exhale deeply, and let his hand relax around his glass. He thought the night had held, that he'd survived it, that the story he spun, the whispers he let loose, had stuck just enough to keep me in the shadows. He didn't look at me, but he didn't need to. He assumed I wouldn't move. He was wrong. I didn't stand right away. I let the moment stretch. Someone chuckled awkwardly. The MC looked around, hopeful. The crowd murmured softly, and then I pushed off the wall near the back and began walking forward. The lights were gentler now, not as sharp as earlier in the evening, but still bright enough to draw eyes. My steps were slow, purposeful. I didn't glance sideways, didn't smile. The noise around me dimmed, not because I was commanding attention, but because no one expected me to speak anymore. The stain on my pants, faint now, but still visible, caught in the light again. A reminder, subtle but pointed, of how the night had started for me. I didn't cover it, didn't adjust my jacket to hide it. I wasn't here to pretend it hadn't happened. I reached the mic, took a beat, then another. I scanned the crowd, faces I hadn't seen in years. Some confused, some curious, a few tight with anticipation. "I don't have a story," I said simply. "Not the kind that gets a laugh anyway." A soft rustle moved through the room, chairs adjusting, bodies shifting. No one interrupted. They just waited. "What I have," I continued, voice steady, "is something different. Not a memory, exactly. More like a pattern." Grayson straightened in his seat. I didn't look at him. Not yet. "Sometimes," I said, "a person gets good at being the loudest voice in the room. They tell the same story enough times that people stop questioning it. And if you stay quiet long enough, people stop wondering if there's another version." A pause. Breath. Letting it sink. "I'm not here to accuse anyone. I'm not interested in pointing fingers. But I think it's worth asking, who benefits when credit is always one-sided? When silence is labeled professionalism and speaking up is called bitterness?" I didn't raise my voice, didn't flinch. "And maybe," I added, "the question isn't why someone stayed quiet for so long, but why they finally stopped." That's when I saw it. The slow, rigid way Grayson's jaw locked. The grip he tightened on his glass. It wasn't panic yet, but it was recognition. He knew I wasn't bluffing. I went on. "Some of you know the work we did back then. Some of you saw the first pitches, the early designs, the hours in basements and coffee shops and cheap rented offices. You might not remember all the details, but they exist. I didn't need to show them anything right now. Just remind them they had already seen it once." "I was there," I said. "I didn't disappear. I didn't fail. I was erased." Now the hush in the room wasn't just politeness. It was weight. Real, full silence. I stepped away from the mic slightly. Let it settle. Someone near the front, Doug from our old research team, turned and whispered something to the woman beside him. She frowned, looked at Grayson. It was starting. "I've got the emails," I added calmly. "The contracts, the timestamps. Not to embarrass anyone, but to correct the record. That's all." And then came the moment I knew would tip it. From the side, a voice, neutral, hesitant, asked, "Grayson, didn't you say the prototype was yours alone?" It was Jane from marketing. She'd been quiet most of the night, but she'd always had a sharp memory. Grayson hesitated. That split second cost him everything. "Well," he said, half rising, I led the—" "Because I remember," Jane interrupted. "It was both your names on the first investor doc." That did it. The tension broke, but not with applause, with murmurs, soft, growing. The kind that says a room is rewiring itself. I stepped back from the mic. Grayson stood now. He wasn't smiling. His eyes scanned the crowd too quickly. He was calculating how much control he'd lost, and how fast. He made his way toward me. Quick steps, unsteady, not angry. Something worse. Panicked. "Can we talk?" he muttered, off mic. His voice shook, barely masking the desperation underneath. "Not here. Not like this." I didn't answer. I never meant to. "Look, you're making a bigger deal than—" I turned to face him fully. "Am I?" His lips parted, but no words came out. Behind us, the MC fidgeted, unsure whether to intervene. A few people stood now, watching openly, not to cause a scene, but because something was being revealed, and they knew it. Grayson stepped closer, lowering his voice again. "Just stop, please." For the first time in his life, Grayson wasn't standing above me. He was waiting on my answer, but I didn't give him one, not right away. I held his stare for a moment longer, then turned back toward the crowd. A few people were still seated, but most had drifted into loose clusters, their voices lowered, careful. No applause, no confrontation, just a slow unraveling of the night, like the air had thinned. Grayson didn't follow me. Maybe he knew he couldn't. Or maybe, deep down, he understood there wasn't anything left to salvage, not in front of witnesses, and not with me. I walked away from the mic without ceremony. The MC glanced at me, unsure whether to say something, but stayed quiet. Probably the right call. People didn't part for me like I was Moses, but they did step aside. I noticed it in small things, the way conversations paused when I passed, or the way eyes followed me to the door and didn't look away when I caught them. In the hallway, I paused near the table with the class yearbook and memorabilia. I glanced at an old photo, Grayson and me, 23 years old, side by side, arms around each other like brothers. The irony of it wasn't lost on me. It didn't sting, though. Not anymore. Outside, the night air wrapped around me like a long exhale. Cool, unfiltered, grounding. I didn't rush. Just stood there in the parking lot for a while, hands in my pockets, watching people trickle out behind me, slowly reclaiming their real lives. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and pulled the door shut. The sound of it, solid, final, gave me a strange sense of calm. I sat still, keys resting on my thigh, and waited for the buzz in my hands to fade. No more adrenaline, just stillness. I didn't need to run. I didn't need to stay. For the first time all night, I chose something for myself. Quietly, fully. I glanced down. That faint wine stain was still there, barely a shadow now, but under the parking lot light, I could see it. I thought about going home and scrubbing it out, throwing the pants in the washer the second I got in. But then again, maybe not. Maybe I'd keep them like this for a while, not because I was proud of the mess, but because I wanted to remember who I was when I walked through it. That stain didn't define me, but it marked a night when I stopped being silent. The engine turned over with a soft hum. I didn't head straight home, though. Instead, I veered off Route 59 and pulled into a small diner I remembered from years ago. Still open, still half-lit and mostly empty. A couple of truckers sat near the back, and the waitress behind the counter gave me a nod, but didn't ask questions. I slid into a booth by the window and ordered coffee. Nothing fancy, just black. The kind that doesn't ask for sugar or sympathy. While I waited, I pulled out my phone. No missed calls, just a message thread with my wife. I typed, "On my way home soon." A few seconds passed before her reply came through. Okay. No emojis, no over-explaining, just a word with weight behind it. I stared at that little screen longer than I needed to. Then I put the phone down. The coffee arrived. I wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the warmth settle in my fingers. Around me, the diner hummed with the low sounds of cutlery and an old ceiling fan clicking softly every rotation. No one here knew who I was, and tonight, that felt like freedom. I looked out the window, the dark sky reflecting faintly against the glass, and let my mind wander, not to revenge or what I could have said differently, but to something quieter. Forgiveness. Not the kind they talk about in books or sermons. Not the dramatic, teary-eyed sort that ends in embraces and second chances, but the kind that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. The kind that looks like letting go without inviting someone back in. Grayson wouldn't get my trust again. He didn't need to. Forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me. It was deciding not to carry his version of me forward. It was drawing a line, not in anger, but in clarity, and refusing to step back over it. The past didn't vanish tonight. It didn't fold itself into a neat little package with a bow on top. But something shifted, something loosened, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't trying to rewrite history. I was just done letting it rewrite me. The coffee cooled in my hands. I drank it anyway. When I finally stood to leave, I felt taller. Not proud, not victorious, just grounded. Some wounds never close the way you want them to. But eventually, they stop bleeding. And when they do, you stop flinching every time someone says the wrong name or tells the wrong story. I didn't get an apology tonight. I got something better. I got my voice back. I didn't leave that reunion lighter. I left it free.